Hi, hello, and good morning. And we are about to continue our classes and studies in the book of Full Devotion, and we are holding on page 29. We discussed that which the Torah provides and records in the sixth portion of the second book of the Torah, book of Exodus, book of Shemot. And in this portion, the Torah promises blessings, basically in children, in health, and in sustenance. This promise is predicated on Va'avadatem es Hashem Elokechem. You shall serve, avoda. You shall serve God, and then He will bless you with all the things. Serving God. And the word that is used is not just to do certain things, but it's to serve. To serve means, in the Torah, when they use the word avoda means to work. It is labor, not just, it's toil, not just simply, all right, my token eating matzah on Pesach, I consider that my work. That's not work. Work and toil is something that really takes us, unless, of course, it's very, very difficult for a person to eat the matzah, and that is in and of itself a toil. But generally speaking, eating food is not necessarily a toil or a labor for people to, it's a pleasure for people to eat most foods, unless you're being served borscht. As the story goes, that I related some time ago, that when we were just 2 or 3 weeks after we were married back in Brazil, and somebody was honoring us one evening and bringing out dish after dish, and they were building up to this big dish, and finally they bring out a big bowl of hot borscht, and that's one. I'll eat anything, but I might be allergic to beets, or I don't know, but it gives me a headache. I don't mental probably, but I don't appreciate it. And here they've been building up. I just didn't have the heart, and where there's a will, there's a way. I just gulped it down. I told my wife I don't like it, so she says, "Well, tell him." I couldn't do it. So I ate it so fast that by the time I was finished with the bowl, I don't think anybody had more than 5 spoons. And so they said, "Oh, you must love this. Can you bring it some more?" So I said, this meal has been so fantastic, and one after the next, you're bringing out dish after dish. I don't know what's coming, so I'll thank you for what
I'll wait for the next words.
But I never shared with them that I didn't like borscht. I would never break that to them. I didn't think that would be the right thing to do, and I just didn't have the heart. That's the only time I've ever eaten borscht. So that was a toil. That was labor. But it wasn't that bad. You get it. You're in. It's finished. Some people get sick from drinking wine or eating matzah, and they can't handle it. I bring every year when I go for my big Pesach shopping, there are people who call me and ask me for gluten-free oat matzah or it's made from spelt or because they don't do it well, or they're made from oat which doesn't have any gluten. Oat is gluten-free because it doesn't have any gluten.
It depends on how it depends on the oat and how they process it.
Right.
The
oats can.
Yeah, they can.
Anyway, but that's just food. But the real toil is that when we have tendencies that take us away from our norm, our comfort zones. I'm sorry, the tendencies are our comfort zones, and we are not supposed to be doing that. And that is toil, because your body is screaming, pulling you, dragging you to do something, and you know that you shouldn't be doing it. And sometimes, as somebody wrote in last week's Good Shabbos email, you're just not in your hands anymore. The choice has been taken away from you, basically, and you don't have any choice. People who are junkies in addictive tobacco or drugs or whatever, alcohol, they get to a point where, unless it's possible, or food overeating is possible, but it takes a tremendous amount to get they may have to make a real heavy choice over everything. So that takes an unbelievable amount of focus. It can take years. for a person to be slowly removed from this addiction. Most of these people cannot help it, quote. They made such poor choices in their lives over many years that they are now stuck in that rut of whatever it might be, of addictive, damaging idea, damaging points. Somebody once told me, I can't stop eating ham. I said, what are you talking about? Just get corned beef, get some. No, that has to, he had this craze. So I'll never be able to. I will never be able to.
Good.
And the way you are now, you won't be able to. But if you somehow find something, dig deeper into your heart, into yourself, you can find it. And it's the same thing. People who have tendencies to be in a certain way, to behave in a certain way, to do certain things, or not to do certain things. There's a way to dig deeper, which takes a lot of toil, a lot of labor. But God promises that when you do that, I will bless you in all three main areas of life, which are health, children, and sustenance. So that's how we began this thing. And then we began to ask the question, what does God need from our toil and labor? It seems as if God is saying, I want you to do this. And if you do it for me, then I will bless you. I will take care of you. So I need you to be, what does he need? He needs. By definition, if you say something that someone needs, if I need money, that means I'm lacking money.
No. Watch and let it No.
We found the word.
If I need to eat, that means I don't have any food or energy in my system.
No.
Well, if that's the case, then you say God needs you to do something, that means he's lacking something.
What can God do?
What can God lack? He lacks anything? And should God really care whether I choose to eat this animal or that animal? Is that really a big deal? And so we spoke about God gave us the mitzvahs to refine a person. A person who is observant of mitzvahs is one would expect of that person to be a refined person. And when they are not, when you find people who are supposedly observant and have these long payas and yarmulkes and tzitzis and all that, and they do something which is unbecoming of someone who you would feel in that stature, it's a lot worse than a common shmerel out there. The shmerel out there is, it might be a god, and but when you have a person who is supposedly observant and he's so, then what happened to your observance? It's a hypocritical thing. Today you have, in upstate New York, you have jails that are filled with very highly orthodox, Nina, please sit down, or go somewhere. You have people who are Orthodox Jews who got either caught up in some kind of scam or led some kind of scam. They have their Torah studies and they have their davening 3 times a day and they have their kosher food, strictly Orthodox kosher food in the jail. Or some people,
They want to get that out there too.
right? Or some people are there because of mistakes or miscarrying of judgment as well. You have justice as well. You have people like Rabashkin who's there. It's a scam what happened there. Anyway, because people are jealous and whatever. Business, competition, whatever it is. Yeah, but when you tell a common person that you have people in jail like that, how does that happen?
Chulul Hashem.
How does that work? Chulul Hashem, it's called. It's a desecration. It's a disgrace. You're supposed to be. So when a person is like that, when a person is like that, we wonder what's going on here. Because when you're observant, that means that you're supposed to be a better person. That's what you would expect. And the truth is, these people work very hard on themselves, but they're also weak. Everyone has weaknesses, and they sometimes give in or get caught or whatever. But it becomes a scandal when it's these kind of people. Because it's not expected. You just don't expect these people to behave that way. Why? So that the Talmud says, the Midrash says, that the mitzvahs were given to the Jewish people, letzaref et habarias, to refine the people. So that's for people, not for God. If that's the case, then God's giving us a way to refine ourselves. He's giving us a good lesson in how to become better people. But what does God get out of it? On the other hand, we find elsewhere where the Torah, where the Talmud and the Midrash talk about God needing this. He wants us. He's waiting for us. But what does He need?
Question though, Rabbi. It makes reference to if you do all these things I need you to do for me, I will bless you with all of this. But those of us who are not as observant or, I still look at it, I'd like to think that He still watches out over us and, as far as health and we're still people.
Sure.
Just that coming across as
You have plenty of people who are very heavily orthodox, observant, whatever, and they're not doing well.
Correct.
And you have plenty of people who are not observant, and they are doing well. Now, we don't know those calculations. God looks out for everybody. Everyone's God's child. I don't know. No one here will understand how that works. That's impossible.
And isn't this referring to people while they're living in the land of Israel?
Now, I was just about to say that when you're in the time of exile, everything is haywire. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I'm not sure if you, in the week that you weren't here, if you caught up with the YouTube on the thing, but I spoke about in the same portion, and in the 2 portions later, the Torah predicts something. The Torah continuously shares things which are impossible for a human being. That's why it's impossible for a human to write things like this. Because, for example, in yesterday's portion it said that a plague of locusts hit Egypt, and it said there was never a plague like this before, and there will never be a plague like this after. Now, if that were not to happen, then the entire validity of the Torah will be questioned. That's it. Okay? So if when the Torah makes a statement like that will never happen, that there'll be a plague like this, then you know that there's a confidence there that was written by someone who had obviously knowledge of what's going to happen from there on till the end of time. Now, in this portion, the portion that this is coming from, it says like this: I want you to come to visit me 3 times a year, in the pilgrimage festivals. 3 times a year you must come and see God. On the festival of Matzah, which is Passover, God calls it Matzah. We call it Passover. Isn't that amazing? This is just by the way. God calls it Matzah Festival because this is what we did. We didn't have enough time. We ran out of Egypt. So it highlights us. But we call it Passover because who passed over the door? God. So we call what God did for us. Anyway, so God says in the festival of Matzah, in the festival of Shavuos, where the Torah was given at Sinai, and which is only a few weeks after Passover, and then in the festival of Sukkot. No high holidays are required to be in Jerusalem. But those 3 are called the pilgrimage festivals. That's a requirement of every male, it says, to be there. It's not required with the females. They may have young children, they may have babies. They can come. It's not like they don't come. They usually would like to go if you're having a festival. And if you're going to see God, that might be a good idea. But they're not required to go. Children are also not required. If you're over bar mitzvah, then you're required to go. And that's what it says. All the males are required 3 times a year. The women are required to come once in 7 years. At the end of the sabbatical year, there was called the gathering year, the Hakhel year, where everyone went. All men, women, and children. Everyone was required to go. Says the Torah after that. No one will desire your property and your possessions when you go up to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festival. That means you may have farms with animals. You may have fields, and you may have produce that's growing in your fields. You may have possessions. You may have a car. You may have horses. You may have whatever it is. And you left your home, but not just you. All the Jews were required to go. And if it was a year of Hakhel, the gathering year, men, women, and children, no one was home. Deserted cities. Who's going to look after you? Says God, I will. No one will take anything that you have. And the Talmud is filled with various stories about this. When people were worried that people did something and nothing ever happened. Should anything have ever happened, then people would say that the Torah is, something's wrong. And that would be the end of that. Then there would be no need to, then it's a human being offered it, and who cares? Then why not eat whatever you want? Why not? Why do you have to keep Shabbos? Why not? No. So the Torah gives a very clear indication. When you are living in Israel, phenomenal things happen, miraculous things happen, because you can't leave your home and your possessions basically to the wind for a week or 2 or 3 and expect no one to some guy to make excuses and then wander around and start picking what he wants.
Before security systems.
Yeah, before surveillance videos.
Right.
So we're talking here in a situation, this is what the Torah is saying. I will bless you, this is when you're in Israel, and I've taken you to the land. You will serve God, and then I will bless you. So it's hard to compare today's day and age, which we are definitely living in an idea called exile. Exile doesn't mean that your hands are chained and that you're building pyramids for Egypt, or you're sitting in a barrack somewhere in Poland. That is terrible times of exile. But exile has been for close to 2,000 years since the destruction of the temple. The temple, the Beis HaMikdash, the holy temple, stood in Jerusalem for 420 years. That was the second one, and 410 years the first one, which was destroyed about 70 years before the second one. In that temple, there were miracles that occurred every single day, including, I was in Jerusalem 3 weeks ago, and it was one of the heaviest snowfalls they've ever had there. But they have snowfalls like this. If a foot of snow was falling, they closed the entire city down. Now, the temple courtyard was outdoors. The temple had a structure in which was the menorah and all of that, and outside was the altar. And there was a fire burning on the altar the whole time. Now, could you imagine in a foot of snow, how could that fire last? That never, the fire lasted, but the smoke, there was a pillar of smoke coming out of that altar that went always upwards. They had a special ingredient and a special miracle. When they would go all the way up, like a chain, straight up. And the wind never managed to blow that smoke. That's called a miracle. In the Talmud, there are lots of those. The temple had many times tens of thousands of animals. Like on Erev Pesach, where everybody had a Paschal lamb, there were a lot of people, a pilgrimage festival. And trust me, there are lots of flies in Jerusalem. There was never a fly found in the temple compound. That's just miraculous. That's not because there's so much blood and guts over there, all these animals. How would you have? No. So there were miracles that went on there. These were changing nature type of miracles, and plenty of others, which now's not the time to get into. But the bottom line is, while the temple stood, God was visible, if you will. They came to see God. See God means that they saw these miracles. They saw unnatural things happening in front of them. And then they realized that God is with them. It was after the temple has been destroyed where things are warped, where things are crazy. It says in the Megillah, that's our next major holiday. Well, it's a pretty major holiday, Purim. So in the Megillah it says that night, chapter 6 begins with the words, that night the sleep of the king was disturbed. He couldn't sleep. And they brought the book of Chronicles and they read that somebody had saved the king from these two people who conspired to kill the king. And who was it? It was Mordecai. Haman was coming in the morning and he was coming to ask permission to hang Mordecai. And the king says, wait a minute, before you say anything, who would I want, if I were to honor someone, what would I do? And he said, well, who else is he going to honor? He's going to honor me. Give him the king's horse, give him the king's clothing, give him the king's men, and take him, parade him through the town. And it was Mordecai. He said, you go do this now. To Mordecai, that was the beginning of the end. So the sages teach on this, that when it says, and that night the king's sleeping, was disturbed. It's a reference to the King of all kings, God. He's waking up from his slumber, and as it says in Tehillim, the book of Psalms, it says, and God wakes up as though he's sleeping. He was waking up and he was remembering, oh wait, you know what, I better say Mordechai and the Jewish people now has some trouble here. Waking up, God was sleeping. What does that mean? So Hasidic teachings explain that when God sleeps, it means that it seems like everything is wrong, it's haywire. How could they put us into gas chambers like that? 6 million babies, children, men, beautiful women? What is going on here? That's God is asleep. The problem is we are asleep. Because then we get Israel and we get miracles and miracles after miracles and we just don't seem to take any notice of them. That's the problem. But we are also sleeping. That's exile. Exile means that things are wrong. It's like a child who has been banished to somewhere out in Vegas or something, and that and he's wanted home by his parents. It's an unnatural thing. Families should always be together.
It is unnatural.
Not quite.
So that's what exile makes things haywire. Exile makes things that are incorrect and that shouldn't be, they're not right. So it doesn't only mean that your hands are shackled and that we're building pyramids in Egypt. It means that things are just distorted and not the way they should be. Even Jews who are in Jerusalem, sitting next to, their window can be looking out to the kotel, to the wall. They say next year, Shana Haba Yerushalayim, next year we'll be in Jerusalem. And when they pray the Yom Tov prayer, the festival prayers, in the Musaf that we do, it says over there, because of our sins, we have been exiled from our land. They're sitting in the land right next to where the temple stood. It doesn't mean exile physically necessarily. Exile is also a spiritual state, where things are just not right. Things are incorrect. They're just not the way they should be.
Terrorist attacks.
Sickness, disease, people stealing, people suffering. That's exile. So when God says, I bless you, it's a reference to when things are normal. When things are not normal, then things are not normal. All right, so we began to answer the question of what does really God need? He started talking about that in the Kabbalah, it's a reference to the master of all masters. And when you say master, that means there is something else. You have to be a master over something. You can't just be a master. Say, you can't sit at home and fantasize. You know, when you play your games on your computer or on your Wii, wherever it is, you're always going to win the World Series. You're always going to win the Super Bowl. You're always going to beat the other guy down. And that's the goal. And if you don't, you're going to try again and again and again until you mastered it. And then when you play, every time you win. You're always going to be a winner. That's called fantasy. That's called complete, total fantasy. That you can't be, you're not a real player. You're just messing around. However, when we say you're a master over something, that means that there are people who depend on you and you provide for them. I don't mean master in a nasty way. I mean master as in charge of something. As the words in Kabbalah, you can't be a king over your family. You're a father. You're a mother. You're not a king or a queen over them. You can't be a king over a herd of sheep because a herd of sheep can't accept you as a king. They can't appreciate you as a king. That's not kingship. Kingship is when people accept you. When you're a dictator, then you're not a real king either. When the guy in North Korea takes his uncle and throws him to hungry dogs, and that's exactly what he did, by the way, starved dogs for 3 days and then threw 5 people in there, and waited for a half hour. It was a public spectacle until they tore all these people to death and ate them up. 120 starving dogs. That's not a king. That's a thug who is imprisoning all the people who happen to live there. It's brainwashing or whatever it is. It's evil, total evil, complete, utter evil. Or Stalin doing what he did or whatever. A king is a person who has accepted upon himself to provide, to take care of his people. That means to govern, to protect, and to supply. That's the king's mission. That's the king's point. Today we don't really have that monarchy system. So we have a different system. We have a president of the United States whose mission is to help his people. His mission is to guide his people, be an example, and to govern and to react to security issues. And if that president is attacked, it is his duty to make sure that an attack like this never happens again. That's his mission. And that's why some presidents we say are very good ones. And we say sometimes we look at presidents and we are disgusted by whatever. Doesn't matter what. Doesn't matter which side of the spectrum you're on. You don't like this because you don't think that this was a proper example or a real reason that we govern properly. So a king is a person, or one is someone who has subjects who accept that person, who in this day and age, who vote for that person in the office, and they want that person to be looked up to they trust that person with whatever it is. So when you call God the master of all masters, and even the highest levels of God, that means that God, without his people, wouldn't be a king, wouldn't be the master. Which is strange to look at God that way. If you're going to look at God, you're going to say he's the all of everything. So if you turn back please to page 27, there is a footnote that we studied last week, but after this, I should have given this introduction last week, in other words a little longer. On page 27, footnote number 25, we're going to go through this quickly, we're going to take our time on this, but just to bring us back into this concept. It was a pretty heavy concept. Singular master, source of all sources. That's what the Kabbalah refers to God, the singular master, and he is the source of all sources. This unusual expression refers to the highest aspects of godliness. This expression appears to have been used by Avodat HaKodesh, living in the 15th or 16th century, to specifically address the effect of divine service upon the heavenly realms. He's referring to how what we do affects the heavenly realms. The term master indicates that service is somewhat relevant at this level. You are only a master over people. If you call a master, that means there are other people who are doing something for you. A master means that there are people working for you. There are your subjects, or you can be in your home and you can have people working for you. That means that you need your carpets vacuumed, then you need your clothing washed, and you need your dishes washed up, and so on and so forth. These people do it for you. They need your garden straightened out, your yard. These people do it for you. So a master means that there are people who are working for you. So when you call God master, that means he's dependent on people who are helping him, doing things for him. Yet the connotation of singular is opposite, implying that he is alone and he has no need for this service. You say singular master, singular either then you're on your own, or master means that you have your master over others, and that others are doing things for you. So although divine service does not actually affect this level, because that level is singular, he is so removed and remote that whatever we do shouldn't really affect God on that level, there is nonetheless a use for it even there. Something has to give there. You're calling him a master, that means there's something that has to be there. As will be explained in the continuation of the discourse regarding the function of divine service as it relates to God's essence. How do we change God's essence? We're now on page 28. This is why singular master is the source of all sources, which is a level that is not related to the finite construct of the spiritual world, not even as their source. Last week we went through this again, that with the way God's energy is projected into this world, it works through a filtration system. So it starts off with the most intense, godly, infinite, unlimited, energy, but then things begin to limit and to filter the spirituality, the holiness, the greatness of this level, and you have higher worlds, and then you have lower worlds, and then you get to the lowest of all low, through many, many, many myriad of filters, until it gets down to this world, and it looks like it does here, without having apparent or obvious godliness in this world, and so much so there can be opposition to godliness only here on this world. So you can have a Pharaoh who says, "Who is God? I don't need to listen to him," and you can have people who murder and hurt and steal and cheat and so on, because they don't feel there's God. If they realize that God was on top of them, they would never do this. If they knew God, if God was there, then they would never do it. Pharaoh said no, 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 until he finally realized that God is here, when everybody was dying in the plague of the firstborn, and that was it. God, get out, go. Do what you need to do. Because he came to a point where there's God. Took him a while. Took 10 plagues. Got beaten around a little bit. But then he came to the realization. Once he came to the realization, there was no need to hold people anymore. But then, like a fool, he ran after them, and the rest of them got dumped into the sea. So this system is a natural system, the way we would have it today. If you had an intense light, and it was too intense, you put on certain types of goggles, and you put certain types of filters until the light is accessible, until the light is usable. And if it's too strong, you can't use it. So if you have a pot or a cup, and you try to fill it with water, and you have this big, heavy stream of things, you'll be lucky if you don't get swept away by the stream. The cup is not going to be filled up. It's too heavy. It's too much. So you gotta narrow it down to a stream where it's accessible for you. Now you can use it. And it's a similar thing the way God's energy comes to this world. That's the natural order of things. So this level, source of all sources, master, that's not in the natural order of things. That's not the way God is here, down in this world. Not related to the finite construct of the spiritual worlds, not even as their source. Rather, it is the source of sources, removed even from the sources as much as the sources are removed from mundane matter. It's the source of all sources. That means it's not even the source. It's the source of the source. Being the source of the source means it's completely removed from any kind of natural level or the normal level, even within the infinite of God. It's completely removed from any kind of finite limitation of anything. It is the ultimate reason why anything exists, but does not relate to anything that is even remotely finite. Ultimately, it exists because God wants it to exist. So you're talking about the essence of God. He wants this world. If he didn't want this world, he would never have had it. It wouldn't be here. The essence of God wants this world. But there's no relation between the essence of God to the outcome. For that, he put in systems. So, if you will, it would be like the difference between light and the source of light. The source of light is very heavy. The light that comes out of it, though, as far as it goes, the further it goes, the less intense it becomes. You're talking about the source of light, though. So let's say the sun, and out of the sun comes all this energy, as in the form of light. And the sun is its source, burning fire, millions of degrees and all of that. But the source of the sun, what put the sun there and turn that on, that's even higher than and has no necessary connection to the light that comes out of the sun. It just wants it there. Doesn't relate to it. Similarly, God, the source of all sources, means that He is the reason why it exists, but that source of all sources doesn't really relate to what eventually happened. There's no connection between them. However, if we...
straight connection, there is a connection.
Right. Which he's about to say now. However, if we grant that there is an ultimate purpose for everything, which would include even divine service attached to lower spiritual realms, when the ultimate plan for everything is fulfilled through divine service, the outcome would be of concern to even his highest level of godliness. In other words, whatever happens as a result of this light, he definitely does want, and it is concerning to God. He wants, so let's go back to the level of the sun. If I put the sun in motion because I eventually wanted something to happen, so I switched on that switch, I might not relate to what the sun is doing, but what eventually is going to happen as a result of that sun is definitely what I want to happen. Ultimately, I want that to happen. I want the effects of the sun to do what it does. Hence, this variation of the term master would apply even at the highest levels of God. This discourse will clarify whatever that is.
I was going to ask that about going back to the master
Right.
concept. The master is kind of dependent upon the servants. So when you were talking about being removed from the source, where is the master of servants? Yeah,
That's basically what he's about to get into over here.
right.
Okay. Gosh, all right. Let's turn back to page 26 again. We're going to read now the text rather than the footnote. To explain, Hasidic teachings cites Avodat HaKodesh, that's that book that we were talking about, that the aforementioned statement of our sages, which is, for what does the Holy One, blessed be He, care? So we mentioned before that what does He care? If it's this way or that way, why should He care? With all these commandments that are dependent on time and place and all that, okay, big deal. I'll serve God in my way, where I am. Why do I have to go to a synagogue? Why do I have to go to the temple? Why do I have to eat this food? Why do I have to do it on this day? I'll do it the way I feel. What, God really cares? Does God really care? That's a question that is asked by our sages. Believe me, it's not an unusual question. Sounds like a question of a heathen, but really the sages ask that same question. Because in order to understand God, you have to understand what He wants. And who wants it? And why would He want it? So that statement, so the Avodat HaKodesh says it refers to the singular master, source of all sources, who is indeed not concerned at all over the performance of mitzvot. He doesn't care. However, for the sake of glory, to influence the supernal heads and to unify the beginning of thought with its end, the performance of mitzvot is an absolute necessity. Okay, so he's brought in now a whole bunch of ideas here. The first idea is the sake of glory. What exactly does that mean? Secondly, what does it mean to influence the supernal heads? What heads are we talking about here? And thirdly, what is the beginning of the thought to the end? So let's go one after the next. First thing is the glory, to influence the glory. For the sake of glory. What does the sake of glory mean? Footnote 26. Glory is not an essential state, but rather a state of vestment. That means it's not necessary, but it's a state that is wanted. He wants to do it. Similar to clothing, that a person wears, but is not a part of the person himself. Clothing that we wear is really not necessarily who we are. It just really defines like the position that we're in. So a doctor will wear these white whatever, so that's a doctor. And a banker will wear a suit and tie. A lawyer will wear a suit and tie. And the garbage collector will wear some garbage kind of clothing. They don't wear fashionable clothing when they're collecting the garbage. But when they're going out at night, then the garbage collector might be wearing a suit and tie. And the lawyer might be wearing a casual sweater and jeans. Because it depends where you're going. So when we went out to Callaway Gardens on New Year's Day, we didn't really end up going there because they were closed, even though the website said they were open. So I took with me some of my camp clothing. A heavy jacket, a baseball cap, or whatever. Why? Because I wouldn't take my fine sabbatical attire when I'm riding a bike or rolling in the grass over there. That wouldn't be silly.
That is such a hard image for me to picture.
I do that more often. No. When you have kinderlach, and 8 o'clock, when you have children and grandchildren, then
Let's just
sometimes-
take fishing in the boat.
or when I was in Israel, many of the days that I was in Israel, I was wearing, we would do hiking
Yeah.
and some other things. I was wearing sneakers and I was wearing a baseball cap, and it was very cold in Israel. It was really cold. So I was wearing my thick Yankee jackets or whatever. I was wearing t-shirts every day. I wasn't wearing button-down shirts. What do you wear? I wasn't sitting and studying. I was messing around. And so I took my camp supply with me. And every day I wore a different t-shirt, and every day I wore a different baseball cap. But the baseball caps also had a message. One day it had New York on it, with a Billy Crystal thing. The other day it had Yud, Ayin, Nun, Kuf, Yud, Samach.
Yankees.
Six Hebrew letters spelled out Yankees. I have that kind of hat.
That's
The other day it had Georgia.
You mean the same message every day?
No. The other day it had Tzahal, the Israeli army.
Oh, yeah.
I have different caps that I wore every day for a different purpose, different reason, whatever. Just to be different and to be unusual, and to be cool. The kids shouldn't. But on Shabbos, I walked out. They went, whoa! What? I said, no, this is normal me. They would, like, when they saw me dressed, they said, oh, you get dressed up early, the long black coat, the hat, and the tie, and what happened to you? Everybody was looking, whoa. Anyway, so clothing doesn't necessarily, it's not you, it's not the person. Even without any clothes on, with complete naked, we still manage to get around, and we might feel a little uncomfortable, maybe a little cold, but we do our business in the shower.
Jail.
In the real Hasidic homes, we take showers with all our clothes. How else are we going to get our clothes? So we do things without any clothing on, like going to the mikveh or going to the shower, and so on. So the clothing are not really us, they're not really essentially us. They express who we are if we choose to. We could also choose to be casual on a whatever day. As long as you're covered with clothing, it's fine. So a vestment is not essential to a person. It is important, but not essential. If you don't eat, you don't exist. If you don't wear clothing, you might be uncomfortable, you might be very uncomfortable, you might even be in jail, but you will continue to exist. Okay, so that's what it means by essential. There are three basic needs for a person, which are food, clothing, and shelter at home. So food, of course, is an essential, absolute essential. Clothing is not as essential, and shelter is even less essential. Of course, we need them all, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have anything, but that's the categories of essential. Without food, a person cannot survive. Without shelter, you'll find a van to live in, you'll find something. Okay, so glory is not... Huh? I'm talking about a home, house. Home, place to call your own. Glory is not an essential state, but rather a state of vestment similar to clothing that a person wears but is not part of the person himself. Serving God glorifies him just as a servant glorifies a king by performing his service. So when you're making a party and you're on the big people of society and you have your big castle that you're living in and you invited 75 people for your Passover Seder, you want to know that when the Seder begins, this table will be sparkling and everything will be on it, and the aromas wafting through the home will be just the best, and the gardens will be nice, and everything will be in place because you have a crew of 50 people who are working for you. They glorify you. And you don't have to do a thing, just pay them, and they do everything for you. So, the things that we do glorify the king, just like servants glorify the king that they're working for, the master that they're working for. However, the service of God does not affect God directly. It's just the glory. It's just the extra stuff. It doesn't affect God in his essence, Just like clothing doesn't really affect the essence. It only adds glory to the level of godliness that it's vested within the spiritual world, not to God's essence. So I can wear a doctor's garments and on Purim, and I won't be a doctor. It doesn't really change the essence of the person. It just adds stature to the person. So on Shabbos, when I was in Israel, I got all dressed up, which is really how I dress. How I should be dressed every day. People saw a different side of me all of a sudden, but it didn't affect I was the same person. I sounded the same. I did the same things. I didn't change myself just because I was wearing a camp kind of clothing, or hiking kind of clothing. I didn't change anything. I was still teaching Torah. I was still davening. I was still doing everything. I just my clothing looked different, so I had a different look to me, but it didn't change my essence. That's what glory of God means. So mitzvahs add glory to God, which is not an essential. It just makes God look better. As Michael said before, when the people who are observant, or who are so-called orthodox, ultra-orthodox, do something wrong, it's called a chilul Hashem. It's a disgrace of God. A disgrace of God means that if God asks you to do something, it should have an effect on you. If it doesn't, it brings disgrace. But if you do the right thing, it brings the opposite of disgrace, which is glory. But it doesn't change the essence. The next level is supernal head or three heads. In Kabbalah, three heads refer to the spiritual levels of Keter, Chochmah, and Bina. Now, the word Keter in Hebrew is crown. Chochmah means
Wisdom.
Bina,
Oh,
that's Das.
wisdom.
That's Chochmah.
Understanding.
That's Das. Chochmah, the word Chochmah is wisdom. The word Bina is to understand. The word Keser is the crown. Now, so just try to imagine a construct of this. Which is, we keep on referring back to this
Spheros.
to this thing that Robert made. So here you have, you count from the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is the reference to the 7 attributes or 7 characteristics. This is the 3 intellectual levels. On top of this structure here, which is also mankind is also made this way. You have on the head you have the intellect. Then in the heart you have love, fear, and passion or compassion. And then on the bottom you have the endurance levels, the levels of getting things done. So you have endurance and humility, and it's not really essential in what you're doing. It's how you're doing it. And then finally we get to the bottom, to the end of everything. On top of all of this is the crown. The crown always sits on top of a head, but it dictates to what the person wearing the crown becomes. In other words, if you wear the crown, you're the king. Or if you wear the crown, you're the queen. The Queen of England wears a crown every once in a while. I've seen her with a crown. A crown gives the glory to the queen. Makes her look like the queen now. A royalty. But the crown is never part of the person. It always stands on top of the person. But it dictates the whole person. So these levels of intellect and then of characteristics, we all possess some stronger, some less, some more love, some less love, some more discipline, some less discipline. And the same thing with intellect. Some are more intellectual, some are less intellectual, and so on.
So the
Keter is not even part of this, it's above this. And the Keter, the crown, dictates the person. The crown itself, though, is defined in 2 levels. There's the inner part of the crown and the external part of the crown. The external part of the crown is already related to what's down in the bottom. In other words, to the intellect and it sort of dictates, has more of a connection to it. The inner part of the crown is very basic, essential, deepest part of the person. If you want to translate, what's your name? I don't know. Man with a beard.
Oh, no wonder he was hiding, he wasn't
I have to grow a beard.
Still in November?
If you don't watch out, it's gonna look like me.
How are you? Good. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Yeah.
So, the external part of it, we'll be finished in a couple of minutes. The external part of the crown is a reference to willpower. Willpower basically is a power that dictates what we're going to do. So if you don't feel like in the mood to get up in the morning and go somewhere, the will says go. And if we don't like eating borscht, the will says go. And when we have to do something, willpower takes over your emotions, your feelings, your needs. The will says go, and it makes us go. That's the external part of the crown. The internal part of the crown is pleasure. There's no power there. Pleasure can't come with force. Pleasure is this feeling that we can't even describe. It's the most basic inner part of the person that can be. That's the inner part of the crown. Being real, we do everything ultimately that we should have enjoy some pleasure. On the other hand, if we enjoyed it too much, it wouldn't be pleasure. If we had it every day, it wouldn't be pleasure. It would just be routine. So wealthy people who live in, like somebody told me, came to visit, and he said, "Wow, you live on vacation. It was so beautiful, the trees and the houses." I said, "There's one difference, is I work on vacation. I'm here every day, and to me this is not vacation. To you, this is a whole brand new, I live over there. For me, that's nothing. I got to get away from here to something else that gives me pleasure." So pleasure, the inner part of the crown, is the essential part of everything. So the head of everything is Keter. It's Keter, the crown. The next two levels of intellect are wisdom and understanding. First you have a wisdom, which is the flash to understand something, and then you take it and you begin to develop it and understand it. So if I'm presented or you pose a mathematical problem, and you say, that's a good one, let me think. Oh, got it! Now, how did you get it? It came as a flash. Now, then you have to start thinking. So this is how it works. Hold on a second, I got it. Okay, I'll explain it now. That's the understanding part of it. The wisdom comes and goes. That's your wisdom. But then the understanding part of it begins to develop that wisdom, and so that's Bina. So after that, the knowledge is not an essential intellectual part of the person. Knowledge is the connection. Now that I have knowledge, I can connect it to myself. I can connect it to my characteristics. Now that I understand something, after this, the knowledge connects. In biblical vernacular, and Adam knew Eve means that he connected with her. So let's go back into footnote 27. Supernal heads or three heads. In Kabbalah, three heads refer to the spiritual level of Keter, that's that crown, which is above everything. Chokhmah, the wisdom, and Bina, understanding. Keter contains the purest form of godliness. Now that we've translated away from a person and refer to it in the godly transmission of energy, Keter refers to the purest sense of godliness, the completely abstract idea before it is developed to apply to the spiritual worlds. All worlds emanate from the state of Keter, but exist there as godliness that is void of any independent existence. That means it's all part of God. There's nothing separated from God. It's just a pure godliness. It's His will or it's His pleasure. In Chokhmah, which is wisdom, the spiritual worlds exist in the purest form, i.e. they merely exist and are without form or shape. That's that wisdom, that flash that comes to you. So it's now, you can't really define wisdom. What is wisdom exactly? What is your wisdom? Can you tell me about your wisdom, please? It's not really a defined, it's only when you understand what is wisdom, what is in your wisdom, that you can make sense of it. But the wisdom itself is sort of abstract, it's transcendent. Bina, or understanding, represents a development of the godly force as it unravels and takes shape to suit the structure of the created world. And then he says Das, which is knowledge, is not counted as one of these three, because Keter takes it over. Wherever Keter appears, Das is not mentioned with Chokhmah and Bina, because when Keter appears, we're talking about the pure form, not how it's related to the rest of the person. The rest of the person, or the rest of the transmission of godliness, is now after the understanding of it. So it uses those three together. So that's what these supernal heads are, and the beginning to its end. This is 28. This is the divine thought through which the world is created. It begins its development in the three heads, as we said in the previous note, but only finds actualization in the lowest world, which is the world called Asiya, action world, in which human beings serve God and complete the purpose of creation. There's a long journey until this world materializes, all the way at the bottom of everything. The lowest form of creation of the world, of God, from God, is this world. I'm not talking about in the planets now. I'm not talking about in space. I'm talking about in stature, in level. This world is the lowest it can be. And I don't mean just this world. This whole universe is the lowest form of godliness. The whole thing that was created was all created so that this world should be able to exist. And upon this world, there should be human beings who can serve God. I talked about this yesterday, but I can't get into it now. It's a long thought about eating food and so on that we discussed in yesterday's service, and when I was talking about the Torah portion. The service of God therefore accomplishes this purpose of connecting the beginning of thought with its end. In other words, it brings about the culmination of the original thought, uniting the highest form of divine thought with its earthly fulfillment. Ultimately, God wanted this world in order that people should be on this world and serve God. When he chose the Jewish people, it's very clear. The choice is to be an example to the rest of the world how to serve God. Our mission of the Jewish people is not merely to serve God, but to be an example or a light unto the nations and to the rest of the world that we can all have a relationship with God. We are supposed to carry the message to the rest of the world. What's the message? That God created this world. The original thought of creating a world where human beings can serve God. And so all this trouble, this whole universe, and this whole world, and everything that's in this world is for one reason. That we should be able to utilize this world to serve God. And we'll do the next footnote next week, with God's help. But the idea here is, the reason why I'm leaving it for next week is because I want it to flow to the next paragraph afterwards. But the point is that the purpose, what God wants from us, from what God needs, if you will, is to fulfill His mission. We fulfill His mission by serving Him, but when we add glory to Him, everything that we do. And if we do it, then we add glory. We do it right, then we add honor and glory to God. We make it kiddush, the sanctification of God. We turn our mission in this world into a glorious mission. And when we neglect to do what is necessary, then it doesn't look as good. So when we have a home, let's say, and we only do half things in the house doesn't look right. We're missing something. We haven't cleaned up properly. We haven't done whatever. It doesn't look orderly. It looks like there's something wrong, or something missing. That's what it means to add glory. It means that we do things because not that God needs us in His essential area, but because that's why God created this world, so we should be able to fulfill His mission, which is to fill a world with godliness, to share godliness, as it will be explained in continuation. Good. Have a great week.